It was 2012 when I first met our next speaker. I was a student at an event of his in a college town close by the Canadian border. I learned a lot about the future Attorney General that day, but there's one thing that stood out to me in particular. He shows up. He previously unseated the chair of the King County Council only to be redistricted out of his seat, and he turns around and beats the current incumbent in his new district. While on the council, he led his colleagues in attendance, was labeled the hardest working council member. And while running for Attorney General, he visited every county in the state to listen and meet the people there. No small feat for an area of land almost the size of New England. In other words, and quite literally, he shows up. Reflecting back on those early local efforts, it is no surprise that we are better off as a state and as a nation that the Washington State Attorney General's office is held by someone with Bob Ferguson's tenacity. We see it in the suits and settlements initiated and won against large corporations for violating customers' privacy rights, for driving up prescription drug prices, and for deploying deceptive recruitment practices. We see it in the bills passed by the state legislature at his request, such as those strengthening protections against wage theft and debt collection, and legislation banning 3D guns. And in what seems like almost a weekly occurrence, we see it in the challenges to this current administration for unlawful and unconstitutional actions. Under his leadership, the Washington State Attorney General's office has filed more than 30 suits against this administration and has not lost a case. From contesting the travel ban to protecting dreamers, the environment, and reproductive rights, Attorney General Bob Ferguson is at the forefront of defending constitutional democracy and our rule of law. Attorney General Ferguson, at the same time when so many people are using the law to inflict more pain on those already hurting, Attorney General Bob Ferguson inspires hope that the law can still bring justice. And Attorney General Ferguson has inspired hope when so many use their best efforts to demoralize us. Attorney General Ferguson shows that when they try to erode the ACS vision, that the law should be a force to improve the lives of all people, that we can and we will fight back. Please join me in welcoming, from my state, the great state of Washington, Attorney General Bob Ferguson.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Patrick. Patrick, and I bring you greetings from the other Washington in the great Northwest Washington State. It's great to be here with all of you. And first, I learned something in the last hour, which is that the luckiest young lawyers in the country simply must be the law clerks for the judges we heard from earlier today, right? That must be the best job in the law right now. So very inspiring presentation. And first, before I get to my remarks, I want to mention that I enjoyed hearing them talk about kids, actually, and family life. My wife and I, we have young twins. They're 11 years old, Jack and Katie. And fair warning in advance, almost every time I give a speech, especially if I'm out of state, I always talk about my kids. So you're going to be stuck hearing a little bit about Jack and Katie when I give my remarks. But I almost never accept speaking requests that are national because we have young kids. I can count on one hand in the last 7 years how many times I've said yes to an out-of-state speaking engagement. But I made an exception for this one for two reasons. One, the ACS. What a wonderful organization and the work that all of you are committed to. I just have so much respect for all that work. And number two, because a classmate of mine from New York University, Kara Stein, we were classmates at NYU. I won't say what year it was we graduated, but we were classmates together, and Kara extended an invitation. So with that combination, how could I say no? So it's really an honor to be here with all of you. And when we were at NYU, anyone here go to NYU Law School by any chance? Oh, awesome. Okay, we got an NYU caucus here. Excellent. So for those of us who go to NYU, if you literally walk out of the building, it's in Washington Square in New York City. If you walk out the front door, what you see right across the street is Washington Square Park. And on that corner, right across from the entrance, there are a whole bunch of outdoor chessboards that are set up there. And you see all these New York chess hustlers working the tourists and separating their money from their wallets. And I would spend a lot of time over there watching these chess hustlers. And I had more than a passing interest in what was going on because when I was a kid, I was totally absorbed with chess. It's all I thought about. It's all I read about. I played in tournaments every weekend. I was my big dream in life was to become a chess grandmaster. And so I played a lot, and all through my teenage years. And it got to the point when I was graduating from high school where I sat down with my mom and my dad, and I told them I was not going to go to college, and I was going to try to become a professional chess player, which is not the usual path to becoming Attorney General, but it worked for me. I'm just going to say it worked for me. And my parents were suitably nervous about that, but I took that year, I went to Europe, played overseas, traveled the country, and eventually realized maybe my future was not as a professional chess player and ended up going back to college. But I tell you that because chess is hugely influential in the way I think about the world, in the way I think about the law, in the way I think about politics, and in the way I think about my work more generally. And chess is a challenging game, of course, and one reason why it is so damn challenging is that the possible moves that are available, let's say Patrick and I are playing a chess game, at any point in time, literally, the number of possible variations that are before us are more than there are atoms in the known universe. That's a fact. It's literally limitless, okay? So a huge challenge in chess is how the hell do you decide what move to make? Out of all these possibilities, how do you make one move? Your clock's ticking, you only got so much time. How do you decide? Well, the better you get at chess, the better you understand something really important, that you have to decide in any given position what's most critical. What's the single most important thing going on? These 64 squares, right? These 32 pieces. What's the single most important thing? And you've got to hone in on that. The better you get, the more disciplined you get, the better you'll be at chess. And right now, what I think in our country is that there's a lot going on, right? There are probably more presidential tweets than there are atoms in the universe going on right now, would be my guess. But there's a lot going on, truly, right? The insults, the tweets, the this, the that, the whole thing, right? For me, what I do is I try to focus on what I think is most important right now. And what I think is most important right now are two things: the rule of law and upholding the Constitution. I think those two things are the most important things. I'm not saying other things aren't important too. I'm just saying those are the important things, the most that I focus on. That's what I choose to focus on. And truly, I get asked questions all the time about what's going on in Washington, D.C. With all due respect to Washington, D.C. or tweets, I just say, you know what, I'm focused over here. And so, Patrick mentioned I filed a few lawsuits against the Trump administration. A few days ago, Washington State filed our 39th lawsuit against the administration. That's a lot of litigation, right? That's a lot of litigation against the administration. But we do have 22 decisions in 22 federal courts across the country. And I am pleased to report, it's not like I'm keeping score, by the way, or anything, right? But I'm pleased to report that so far the record is State of Washington 22, Trump administration 0. That's the scoreboard right now. And by the way, I'm sometimes asked by folks, my state, hey, people think of it as a very blue state. It's really more purple than you think. There's lots of very red counties in our state. And when I speak all around the state, if I'm speaking in the more conservative part of the state, I'm invariably asked, hey, Ferguson, why do you file so many lawsuits against President Trump? And my answer is, I think the better question is, why does the president refuse to follow the law when enacting executive action, when he's taking executive action? Why doesn't he better follow the rule of law? That, I think, is the better question. So I'm going to talk about briefly here today is a couple cases that we've worked on. I'm going to keep it brief and high level, but I'm going to focus a little about how chess has helped me a little bit with those cases, and also something that I've learned I've had a chance to think a lot about the rule of law and the Constitution in regards to litigation against a president. It's unusual to have that much litigation, obviously, against the president, so I've had a lot of chance to think about what's at stake in those cases. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next few minutes. So first, I want to take you back to Donald Trump's election. And I have to admit that I did not, in the last weeks of the election, anticipate him being elected president. Okay, I did not think that was going to happen. And so I learned something when he got elected, which is I learned that I had underestimated him politically. And I told myself I would not repeat that mistake again, that I'd underestimated him, that therefore if he said something during his campaign that he was going to do, I was going to take him at his word that he was going to try to do it. Remember back then, a lot of people thought, well, he won't govern the way he campaigned. The stuff he said during the campaign was just to say it. He won't really do it. I never believed that. And so we began, after his election in my office, started thinking about things that Donald Trump had promised to do during the campaign, which if he actually tried to execute might have constitutional problems. One of those was him calling at campaign rallies, an applause line at campaign rallies, was calling for a complete and total shutdown of Muslims coming into the United States. We thought, well, he might really try to do it. So we began thinking about how we would respond to that if he actually tried to put some kind of travel ban into effect. Some people often say, why was Washington State the first state to file a lawsuit against the administration? Well, a part of it goes back to chess. When Patrick and I were playing our chess game, my job in that chess game, in some ways my most important job in that chess game, is to anticipate every move he makes, right? So when he plays knight c4, I'm like, yep, knight c4. And beyond just anticipating the move, I need to know the reason why he's making that move. So it's knight c4, it's knight c4 with the idea of rook c8, right? Knight f2, that's what he's doing. That's why he's doing it. And if I get either one of those things wrong, either I miss the move, don't anticipate it, or miss the reason for it, that's a big, big problem. That's a big problem. And if that happens, all I'm doing for the next minute is think, what the hell why is he playing knight c4? What's going on? So it teaches you to be very objective. If you're not objective, you're going to lose. You can't be, chess masters will often say, I lost the game because I lost my objectivity. I've got to anticipate his next move every time. After Donald Trump won, we spent a lot of time thinking about his next move. So when he did it, it was zero surprise. It was signed on a Friday night, the executive order, as you may recall. The whole team was in the office that weekend. Everybody knew we're not waiting around until Monday. It's not once next work day. Everybody's in the office that weekend. We're going to work on this thing. And we were prepared to file a lawsuit that Monday. Everybody worked around the clock to put that together. And in thinking about that, that first Muslim travel ban, you have to remember back then, legal experts thought a legal challenge would not work. If you turned on Anderson Cooper and listened to Jeffrey Toobin, no criticism of Jeffrey Toobin, love the guy, watch him on TV, but folks like Jeffrey Toobin said a lawsuit will never work. The president has too much authority to issue an executive order, right? Or AGs don't have the standing to bring a lawsuit, but they said a lawsuit will never work. We felt differently. We felt we had good legal arguments. In addition, candidly, I thought the executive order was outrageous. I thought it was un-American. It was offensive to me, truly. And look, I don't let my personal views get in the way of the law. We felt we had a good legal case, but truly, I felt it needed to be challenged in the courts. We have an independent judiciary. It needed to be challenged in the courts. And it was tough going forward. We were the first state going forward, but part of that decision to go forward that weekend, to not take more time on it, was also something that goes back to chess. When Patrick and I are playing our chess game, when you're playing a chess master, they don't beat themselves. That's not how it works. He's going to make good moves, right? And you start a chess game, if I'm white and he's black, I have a slight advantage, but it's not decisive by any stretch of the imagination, right? So I have to find a way to outmaneuver him. That he's not going to make an obvious mistake for me. Well, that involves almost every time me at key moments in that game taking a calculated risk, okay? A risk that in some ways is going to jeopardize my position, expose myself in some way. Maybe I've got a safe position, but if I want to win, I've got to take a calculated risk. I've got to trust my training, but I've got to do that. In other words, I've got to risk losing in order to win the game. That's how it works. Some chess masters get very comfortable with that. Some do not, okay? I had my weaknesses as a chess player, that's for sure, but that was not one of them. I thought, hey, my best chance to win this game is playing that move, even though it's an uncertain outcome and I may lose. Well, the point of the game is to win, right? Well, that was going on that weekend. I felt, hey, this just had to be challenged. It would have been a bad day at the office if we'd lost. And everybody said a lot of I told you so's or said I filed it for political reasons. But I felt if I did not do it, my position was bad. More specifically, the position of thousands of Washingtonians, people with green cards. We had students who were traveling abroad with green cards. Our students who had traveled abroad for conferences could not come back to Washington State because of the travel ban. What's up with that? What's up with that? People could not go to a funeral for a loved one because if they left the country, they could not get back to my state. And that was going on all around the country. So I knew if I didn't do anything, well, that's an untenable position. So part of it was the ability to take a calculated risk, which I think is so important. This is not the legal term, but it's saying basically, screw it, right? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I'm thankful I have such a fantastic legal team. Kate Kelly from my office is here. We have such a fantastic legal team that works so hard to put those cases together. Now, the case was important for thousands of people across the country, as you know. But I'll also emphasize it was important for what I think are fundamental values we have as a country. I'll give you an example. The Department of Justice, your Department of Justice, you know what they argued in that case against us? They did not simply say, well, hey, the president's got a lot of discretion to issue an executive order on immigration, which he does. He's the president. That's not what they argued. What they argued was the president's authority to issue that first travel ban. I'm quoting now from their brief. I'm quoting from their district court argument and their court of appeals argument. That discretion to issue the executive order is unreviewable by the courts. That's breathtaking. With some audience, I go into some detail about why it's breathtaking. I don't think I need to do that with this audience, right? Literally unreviewable by the courts. Look, there's a new textbook that came out, constitutional law book. A University of Washington law student showed me the introduction about 6 months ago. The introduction of that book is all about one case, State of Washington versus Trump, the first travel ban and the limits of presidential power. Republican, Democrat, Independent, I don't care where folks fall on the spectrum. I think most people in our country think, yeah, the president's accountable to the courts. Even in times of war, presidents have been accountable to the courts. I think that's a fundamental American value, one that the President, Department of Justice did not share in arguing that before the Court of Appeals. Now that first travel ban, they did not appeal it to the United States Supreme Court, as many of you know. There's a second travel ban, then a third one that we were not a part of. That was eventually approved by the United States Supreme Court. But after we went to the Ninth Circuit and they did not appeal it, my team came in to talk to me about it and kind of wrapping up the case. And one of my members of my team said, hey, Bob, do you want to ask for our costs and fees and having to respond to the appeal? And I asked how much it was, and it really wasn't very much money. I said, yeah, we're asking for our costs and fees. And they said, well, it's probably going to take a little more effort just to go through that process than it's really worth. And I said, no, I still want to do it. And the reason is I want the federal government to write a check to the state of Washington for what they did. I want them to write a check. They're writing a check for it. That's what it's going to be. And you'll have to come to Washington State to come by my office and see if that check is framed in my office. I'm not going to give that away. I'm not going to give that away. The other case I'm going to mention briefly is the Dreamers case, which I think Patrick actually mentioned. So this is a case that Washington, New York, Massachusetts have co-led. Other states have joined as well, filed action in New York. So far, we've prevailed. There's an injunction in place. That's the one thing keeping Dreamers, the 800,000 Dreamers we have in our country, from being deported, is that injunction that our courts have put in place. It's currently up before the United States Supreme Court. They haven't exactly taken the case, but they haven't sent it back. It's kind of in a strange limbo up there at the United States Supreme Court. Here's what I want to say about the Dreamers case. To become a dreamer, you have to come out of the shadows and say, here I am, here's where I live, here's where I go to school, here's where I work, this is my address, I'm undocumented, my family members may be undocumented. You've got to take that first step in order to qualify for the DACA program, right? When Barack Obama was president, he set up to add protections for Dreamers. That's the first step you have to have. Well, in order to encourage people to come out of the shadows and risk deportation, saying who they are, to the very entity that has the power to deport them, the federal government made a promise. The federal government literally said to those potential Dreamers, hey, if you come out of the shadows, if you do that, we promise not to use that information against you to deport you. In fact, they even put into, there's a website about the DACA program, there's a question and answer section of it. One of the questions is, hey, will this information, I, potential Dreamer, and giving you, federal government, will it ever be used against me to deport me? Answer, no. We're not going to do that. On the day that the administration, about a year and a half ago now, removed those protections for Dreamers, right? Put a stop to the DACA program. That question and that answer on that webpage is taken down. The administration has made no assurance that they will not use that information against those 800,000 Dreamers to deport them. What's up with that? I think a very fundamental value we have as a country is a deal is a deal. When I speak to audience about my cases, this is often how I talk about it, right? It's often not about details of our Constitution, but the values that Constitution embodies for us as a people. A deal is a deal. I'm convinced that Judge Barron, with his kids and his wife, instilled the value of a deal is a deal to his kids as soon as he thought they could comprehend it. It's that fundamental. My son Jack, here's the first story about my kids. My son Jack, he loves Pokemon cards. I don't understand what they are, Judge, I don't, but he loves Pokemon cards, and they have different values, and there's a game attached to it. I had baseball cards, he's got Pokemon cards. Last night, I was FaceTiming with him, and he was showing me a new Pokemon card. And I said, where'd you get it? He trades with his best friend, Elliot, so he made a trade. When I come home tonight, and I see him tomorrow morning, if he comes into my room and says, Dad, you know what? I realized that trade I made with Elliot's a bad trade. I gave away a more valuable Pokemon card for one that's not so valuable. We got to go back up to Elliot's house and get it back. What am I going to say to him? No, son, that's not how it works. You made a deal. You may have new information now, right? That doesn't change the fact that you made a deal. You cannot go back on that deal. Well, with Dreamers, we're not talking about Pokemon cards, are we? It's about where they can live. This is the only country they know. believe me when I tell you this, dreamers are every bit as American as my son Jack and my daughter Katie. It's a fact. It would be no different than if I went home. The idea of them going back to being deported to a country they don't know would be no different than if I went home to Jack and Katie tomorrow and said, hey, I'm really sorry, kids, but we need to go back to Ireland. And they'd be like, well, what do you mean we're going to Ireland? We don't even know Ireland. It's exactly what it would be like, just still in a different country, and that's exactly what the outcome is. Yet that fundamental American value is at issue in that case with those dreamers. You know, after, just a final thought, after at the first Muslim travel ban case, after we prevailed in the courts, one day I went in the office and my executive assistant, her name's Judy, said, hey Bob, you've got some letters, and some people had written letters, and people from kind of all over the country and eventually all over the world wrote letters. And at first it was a small number, but eventually there were thousands of letters. It's kind of crazy. So not emails, people handwriting letters, right, to me and to the office. And these letters were, so I started reading them, and they were all deeply personal letters. So people would write things like, hey, I was born in a Japanese-American internment camp. Here's what that executive order meant to my family. Here's what this executive order means to me, okay? And you know, these letters were so powerful, I thought, well, if somebody writes from Washington State, I'm going to handwrite a quick note back, right? Someone's going to take the time to write a letter like that, I'm going to write a quick note back. Well, more letters came than I anticipated, so it became a big job to do this, a big job to write all these letters. And, but I was committed to doing it, I started doing it, and so my staff would get them all organized, and I just handwrite a quick note. And eventually the volume became so large, I had to bring them home at night, and I'd do them at home. And up to that point, my kids, who were probably 8, I guess, this was a couple years ago, maybe 8 or 9 at the time, the kids didn't really know much about the travel ban litigation. I didn't talk to them about it. They just knew that I was gone a lot, and they just would ask me why I was gone a lot. And I just said to them at that time, I just thought it'd be too complicated to explain. So I just said, look, kids, the president did a bad thing, and daddy's trying to stop him. That was my line. And which says a great thing about our country, by the way, that our kids just seem nonplussed by that was sort of a normal activity for their dad. And so one night I'm home, and Katie's next to me. This is my Katie story. Katie's next to me doing her homework, and I'm doing my letters. We have a small home. And I'd started getting letters from children, the little kids, who obviously their parents had, you know, cajoled them into writing letters to me. And so I had a stack of these letters. And so I had one that this kid had, it was obviously from a child. Turns out the child was the same age as Katie. Her family's from Iraq, one of the 7 Muslim majority countries impacted by the travel ban. And so Katie saw it, and she could see it was from a kid. And the kid had drawn this picture of me, and which was a really funny picture. And Katie said, Daddy, what is that? And I said, well, it's a letter. And she said, well, who's it from? I said, well, it's actually from a girl your age. And she said, well, why is she writing to you? And I said, well, so I really had to try to think about why was this kid writing to me? And so the little girl had written at some length about the travel ban, actually. And so it was interesting I realized that by reading that letter to Katie, Katie could comprehend the travel ban at a certain level. It was like 9-year-old girl to 9-year-old girl, right? And this girl had written on that letter, she wrote, because you stood up, I can be here. Which is really, right, the most beautiful thing, you know, somebody could write, right? And so Katie, who's a sweet kid, she said, well, why are you writing back to her? I said, well, sweetie, you know, it's polite. If grandmother gives you a Christmas present or a birthday present, you write her a thank you note back. That's the polite thing to do. So I'm writing her a note back. And so Katie said, well, can I write her a note too? And so she did, and she drew a picture of a horse, I think. And I think she said, hey, I'm Katie. I'm also 9 years old. Nice to meet you, exclamation point. That was it. And this became a tradition. Katie asked, can I write a note on all the kids' letters? And so every night, my staff would set aside the kids' letters, and I'd write a note, and she'd write a note back as well. And you know, not long after that letter was written, that girl and Katie had a play date together, which was a really sweet moment. It really was. And I'm not suggesting we can solve all the world's problems with play dates, but it's not, there's worse places to start. But I tell you that because I think when the judges mentioned the impact of the law, right? And I say this to my team all the time. I say to law students all the time, I know there's law students here, the law is a powerful tool. And even a 9-year-old girl, she knows, right? She knows what's going on. She gets it. It's her life. It's her family's life. Can I be here or not? Can I be here or not? And it's the law that has allowed her to be here. And so, as I wrap up, I just want to say how much I appreciate the chance to say a few words, how much I appreciate this organization, the individuals in this room, the organizations you represent, the law firms you work with, the work that you do to uphold the rule of law and to defend the Constitution. Thank you so much.